And that's just purely on a human level to try and deal with the misery that is around as part of our human condition. So it's important for us not to get too glum about the way the social mandate, the societal mandate for social work is being reconfigured. In the end, we actually work with people's pain and we try to assist people to solve the problems that they confront. So there actually will always be a role for social work, however it's structured and however it's delivered. So it's actually not all bad. Let's have a look at society. And what I want to do is just go through and hit upon a few points. Actually, Donna, would you mind just that second one in just tilting? It's just it's hitting the. That'd be great. Thank you. That's great. I think it's a fair enough call to say that in the current society that we are in an age of postmodern pluralism. There's an absolute diversity of interests across the board. And this makes it really hard to try and interpret what our society is about and which way it is going. There are 1,000 voices on any particular issue. And of course government will tell you that's one of the things that make government so difficult nowadays, trying to capture that plurality that's across the way. Now that said, we are in an age of increased social conservatism. And social work must reflect that. Just as in the 60s and 70s there was an era of collectivism, social work had to reflect that as well. That said, I think it's a little bit different at the moment. We're not just in a socially conservative age. We're in an age that's driven by fear and mistrust. And part of the way that society has dealt with those sorts of social angsts is to become more punitive. And I think we do see that reflected in a range of social programs that have quite sharp edges. And you know, I think it's sometimes a bit too easy to sort of label the Howard government as being, you know, the devil incarnate, and sort of seeing that, you know, the sort of workforce changes that they're making, and look at them as the problem. In fact, it's not just them. If you have a look at all the state government programs, they have a similar ilk. Right? They might take off some of the rougher edges, but the theme is still quite punitive. We're also in an age of individualism rather than collectivism, and this is a major problem for social work because our actual approach is about collective response, whereas increasingly our society sees it as the role of individuals. And interestingly, those of you who got the Australian yesterday, we've seen Craig Emerson, who's one of the rising stars, and in fact some people tip him to be, after Kimbo takes us to the next election and fails, that he may be the person who gets the Guernsey. Let's read out the first one because I think this is interesting to try and read, you know, where a politician's seen it when you go. It says that, and I'll just read the first couple of paragraphs. It says, Labor should become the party of self-reliance and initiative by weaning people off welfare payments, says opposition MP and policy reform campaigner Craig Emerson. Consumers should be able to buy childcare and other essential services as necessary, rather than have them supplied through a central command system. It's in a provocative policy parade, the outspoken Labor MP argues the opposition should take an unconventional message to the next election. We will get government out of your faces. Okay. He also warns that the growth in welfare spending under the Howard government will be unsustainable when the national economy slows. So I think that's an interesting difference here. You see, in fact, what Emerson's trying to say is that this sort of neoliberal approach by this government, that Labor in fact needs to get better at that. I'll come back to that more later. There is an increased, in an age of social anxiety, there's a need by many people to have easy answers. Right? In a very complex world, trying to understand what the hell's going on, a lot of people have gone back to fundamentalism. And I don't, we get a lot of the press about how there is Islamic fundamentalism. There's actually also Christian fundamentalism. And in fact, we've had this issue in America, the rising power of fundamentalist churches, and it's occurring here in Australia as well, with the political, you would have seen Families First at the last election. So let's not sort of kid ourselves that this is necessarily about other places in the world. It's actually about Australia as well. And those, of course, fundamentalist approaches search for simple solutions to complex problems, a la Paul and Hansen. Having said that, we are also, I think we've come through a sort of very neoconservative age with Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher leading the way. But we've now gone into quite a neoliberal age. And for that, I won't go too much into this, but basically some of the key concepts involved in neoliberalism is about going back to individual responses, talking about self-reliance, and seeing what's called the responsibilisation process. In other words, what government seeks to do is have individuals take responsibility for themselves. Now, where that comes through in the sorts of programs and services that we provide is that more and more the policy agenda is about people taking responsibility for themselves. Right? We certainly see it in the most recent changes for disability, etc. But it's actually right through the child protection is riven with this stuff. And I think the part of the difficulty for us as social workers is, on the one hand, yes, we do believe in self-reliance, and always had that as a quite fundamental value of ours. The trouble is nowadays, of course, the responsibilisation is also wrapped up in very much a punitive approach as well. So if you don't look after yourself, then down comes the chopping block. We're also, as a broad phenomenon in Western societies, at least, in an era of rampant consumerism. The sort of terms about shopping therapy have come out of a need. People spend money in Western society, and in a profligate way, I think. We spend, and of course, I won't go into the argument about who actually pays for that, but one of the arguments is that we're in an age of neo-colonialism where the people who pay the price for our profligacy actually live in other countries.